inFamous 2, the development process has been going on for about 2 years. The first big chunk of it, almost a year, was pre-production and designing and experimenting with all the big systems, getting big creatures to move through the city, working on the art direction, the core renderer, and then the last year has been production and obviously a big polish section where you're trying to improve the quality of what's there.
I think you've kind of heard us say over and over again the whole leave no stone unturned. Obviously we're a sequel to inFamous 1, so we want to take a kind of wide breadth approach and say nothing is off limits. We want to improve absolutely everything about it. And so we want to retain the core elements of inFamous 1 that our fans love. We also added new elements as well, such as user-generated content is the most obvious one, but in addition to that, we had things like more epicness. And what does more epicness mean? And I think more epicness kind of manifests itself in the scale of enemies, like the behemoth that you saw earlier, and also the big powers that we have. We call them various things, but I think ionic powers is the way we like to refer to them. So Ionic Vortex, the big tornado, the Ionic Freeze, the Ionic Drain, they're really, really big powers that we just didn't have in inFamous 1.
So again, you have big goals and little goals when you start off designing a game like inFamous. So I think the big gameplay initiatives were the heavy powers, which I already talked about, and also bringing melee to the front. The combat experience is really central to what inFamous is, on a minute-to-minute basis. And so it was essential to us to take a step back and say what worked and what didn't work. And I think we felt like hand-to-hand combat, just kind of the physicality of hand-to-hand combat directly with enemies, was an area we really wanted to focus on for inFamous 2.
Cole started off carrying just a big lead pipe, and we went through a bunch of iterations on stuff until we got to the amp that you see in the game now. But it was pretty obvious early on that this was going to be fun. The first times we had a prototype there where Cole was actually swinging something heavy and hitting things with it. It really, you could feel it when you did it. It wasn't like he was just waving around a wand. It felt like he was swinging something heavy and really laying into stuff.
So we actually have a new variant system where we allow you to actually get multiple versions of the same button press. So for example, with rockets, we have maybe 5, 6 different rockets that you could actually access at any given time. And so what I love so much about this is that it kind of fits the mold of an open world game even better. We let the player choose the way that they want to interact with the situation. And so at the end of the day, if you think that it'll be cooler to just stand back and hit him with a couple of lightning bolts, that's fine too. But if instead you want to switch up that lightning bolt to be the stronger lightning bolt on the first shot, switch to the faster stream because he'll start escaping, it gives you the freedom. It'll just pause the game, just hold it left on the D-pad, switch to different power, and over again, within one battle, you could go through all your powers.
In this game, we really wanted to go beyond that. We wanted to have more variety in the powers you had. We wanted to give you, as a player, more opportunity to make tactical decisions about how you're going to deploy these powers. We wanted there to be interesting combinations of powers. So for that to happen, we went to a little bit more complicated model where you really can have a bunch of different powers assigned to R1 and you switch them on the fly. And what that means is that there are all kinds of combinations that you get where you can use the new melee powers and you might decide that you're going to combo that up with some other stuff. You're going to use a specific blast power to get you close enough to guys to melee them, or you're going to use some of the things we let you kind of impair people's ability to perceive you in the game. You can use that to sneak up on people or to get past people. So there are all kinds of things you can do this time around that you couldn't do last time around in terms of being clever and how you're using your powers.
It's literally the type of thing where I'll freeze people, then I'll pick them up with a kinetic pulse and I'll throw them across the world, and I'll switch to another R1 so I can use ice jump to chase after him. It's just something that really affords me the freedom to figure out the best way to encounter or take on an encounter. And it's really something that I think we're basically giving you the car keys this time. What do you want your rocket to be? What do you want your blast to be at any given moment? And I think that's really the cool part about it, about really embracing this open world mentality. Floodtown, which is something that we saw for the first time today, is really interesting because rather than being as vertical as the other parts of the city, it's actually more horizontal. It's a little more flat. What this means is that actually the primary gameplay that you have there, kind of moving around the space, will also change. And so, of course, Floodtown has water on the ground, which makes a big difference as well. But I think one of the things that we noticed today is that while we're trying to play around with it, we have one power which is called the ice launch that kind of launches you more vertically. In addition to that, we also have the Firebird Strike, which is more horizontal. And it's interesting how you decide to use different powers based on what the environment is, And just by changing the overall size of it, kind of the landscape of the entire space, you changed how you want to interact with it. Of course, Floodtown's also pretty special too, because of course it has the water. And with Cole, he never has a straightforward interaction with water. I think in the sewers in the previous game, one of my favorite things to do was see an enemy in the water, just zap near it, and everybody gets electrocuted. And of course, this happens all the time in Floodtown. Water's all over the place. But we also do tricky things too, because we have these rickety bridges that you could collapse if you throw a couple of rockets at it. People fall to the ground, and of course, we're on the ground. It's in the water, and then if it's in the water, you zap them again. So you get to really combine stuff in a really interesting way. One of the first things that we did with inFamous 2 was we actually decided to work on enemies. We started to think of what was the cool thing that we could do different from other games. And because we inhabit this world where Cole's a superhero, he gets the whole system of getting powers as a conduit, we decided, well, why can't the enemies also have that too? We had some of that in the first game, but we really started out and said, well, we could really play with scale, we could play with abilities, and so we fully embrace that. So today you saw the Devourer, you saw the Crusher, you saw the Titan. They're all completely different scales. We have the regular soldiers, of course, like the Ice Soldiers, who also have superpowers. You saw them jumping around like little jumping beans there. But in addition to that, we also have the Crusher, who is slightly larger, also has the ability to throw ice at you. Again, superpowers and slightly bigger. Then you had even bigger than that, which is the Titan. The Titan's a huge monstrosity. I think he's probably about 30 feet tall. He's lumbering around, he's throwing ice at you, he's creating ice shards from the ground. It's really, really cool. But of course, we're not even done with that, right? We even have the Behemoth, which we've showed off before, which is an enormous enemy. I think it's about, gosh, it must be about 100 feet tall. It is enormous. And it was really actually an early focus of ours to say, well, not just with the powers, not just with the parkour system, what else can we improve? And we think that one of the ways that we've improved really well here is the enemy variety.
The development of the project, I think, started with a couple core nuggets, and those have been very true, but almost everything else has changed. So the core nuggets were we wanted to focus on presentation. We wanted to take the core gameplay from inFamous, which we thought was pretty good, and surround it with better cutscenes, better powers, better effects, more beautiful environment, really pushing the presentation, the production values of the game. So that was, has not changed. And the second was really doing large experiences, giving the epic feeling. So whether that's big enemies, whether it's big powers, those things were the fundamental improvements we wanted to make. We also knew we wanted to add something, and while we talked about all those different things, user-generated content was a driving force for us. We felt like we needed to add a major leg to all the things we were doing, and so UGC from really very early was the plan.
Well, user-generated content, that's something that's like completely brand new. And if the feedback we're getting from the beta is any indication, there are lots of people out there that are like, well, I'm not sure why that would be interesting. Once you try it, you're going to change your mind. It's something where it provides a cool new experience for everyone playing the game. Not just about going and building your own missions, that's super fun too, but for the people out there that just want to have more fun inFamous experiences and more kind of crazy stuff to do in New Marais, you're going to be more than satisfied. It's super cool to see what people can do, and people's creativity is amazing to us. Even with the limited set of people we have in the beta now, it's just incredible what people have been coming up with, and it's super fun to see. And I think inFamous players are going to feel the same way.
The CARM system is really interesting because I think one of the things that happened is that we kind of changed our overall approach there. We kind of took a more personal element to it, is one way to think about it. And so we've seen Nyx and Quo over and over again, but one of the ways that they kind of manifest themselves gameplay-wise is that, of course, you get the different powers that come from Nyx and Quo. And today we saw the two missions called Hearts and Minds and Fool and the Rebels. They're completely different missions that you will not experience at all if you play one or the other. So I think one of the earlier missions that we showed off that we kind of, at least internally, called them Save Quo. You notice that for a good chunk of the mission did something different, but it kind of came together at the end. These two missions are completely different. So in one, you actually ride on top of an ambulance, you help Quo actually deliver medicine to the rebels. Because at the end of the day, with both of these missions, you're trying to convince the rebels to help you. Quo's method is to help them by giving them essentially medicine, and you ride an ambulance all the way over. So the gameplay there is you're more or less escorting the ambulance over to the other side. But for the evil version, which is actually fooling the rebels, it's completely different. You start off by first trying to infiltrate the fort, Fort St. Philippe, or Fort Philippe, and from there you actually operate a turret, and you take over the turret and you actually anger the rebels and fool them into believing that the militia are bad people. And so I think Brian said it best a little bit earlier, where it's not like in one version you're riding an ambulance and in another version you're riding a bus. It's completely different gameplay. About a quarter of our game is actually karmically linked, and what this means is that we have a huge chunk of the game that you just are not going to see at all your first time through. And so if you're playing as good, you'll see probably mostly the good missions, and then if you play it again, you'll actually see completely different missions on the other side. So not all the missions, but a good chunk of all that.
inFamous 2 will be available June 7th worldwide, exclusively on the PlayStation 3.